healthcare continues to be a strong market for renovation and construction. Now, obviously, lighting plays an important role in a healthcare facility to successfully providing, the services to their communities. I asked Tommy Nichols, Business Development Director for Healthcare under Acuity Brands, to shine a light on the latest in healthcare lighting. Tommy is an LC and specializes in behavioral health, healthcare, and pathogen reduction solutions. Tommy has grown into his role as an 11-year professional in the lighting industry, serving on the IES Healthcare Facilities Lighting Committee. His areas of expertise include behavioral health lighting, the needs of healthcare specialty spaces, pathogen reduction solutions to help people feel safer, and a dedication to developing solutions to expedite patient healing. Welcome to Keeping the Lights On. I'm your host, Todd Reed, and on this podcast, I connect with the owners and pros who design, build, and maintain our electrical, communications, and industrial world to explore the best ways forward. Let's get into the show. Well, Tommy, as we've discussed, I like to start out each episode with the meals that bring us together because we're trying to learn from different people. And so meals are a good way of doing that. So if I or some of the listeners were, to come visit you in your hometown, where might you take us and why would you choose this place?
One of my favorite restaurants that is newly discovered for me, but has existed for years, is this restaurant called Benny's on the Beach down in the South Florida area near West Palm Beach, but in Lake Worth Beach specifically. And the interesting thing about Benny's is the head chef was transported himself from the northeast of the United States in the New York, New Jersey area down to South Florida, which parallels exactly what I did. And the word Benny in the Northeast itself is actually a derogatory term towards individuals who go down the New Jersey shore, but no one understands that in South Florida. So I understand the intent behind the name, but most folks don't understand it. But one of my favorite parts about it is it's fantastic food, number one. Great seafood, great salads, fantastic drinks as well. And the landscape that this restaurant is set on partially jets out into the ocean. So it's right on the shore on the Atlantic. And it's just a beautiful place to go myself with my family. And that's where I tend to bring folks to who come join me.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. And I like the secret language there. That's kind of cool. Yes. I certainly didn't know what it meant. What is your favorite thing to get there?
Oh, Cobb salads. Every single time. So I might start with some oysters depending on the day and depending how hot it is outside.
Sure.
But Cobb salads and a spicy jalapeno margarita, those are my go-tos there.
Well, and I should go in the winter. Obviously, that's time to go there. But because, and here I am stretching the link here. But I need to go down to Florida because sunshine is good for your mental health, and in the Midwest.
Yes.
So, which gets me thinking about lighting, which is what we're going to talk about, lighting in not just mental health, but in a few different categories, but we will touch on mental health.
Yes.
And the importance of getting it right on the interior, right? Getting good lighting going there. So, but let's talk a little bit about, and this is really broad about the healthcare industry, but Tommy, obviously it's been growing, people can see the construction, our listeners are involved in construction, so they know.
Yes.
But can you get, from your perspective, a couple of reasons why there's such a growth in demand for new and renovated healthcare facilities?
I think the primary reason of being able to either upgrade existing facilities or start from scratch and erect these places of care, these beacons of care that make up our community, is because of the increase of the living age. People are living longer, but that doesn't mean that the facilities were initially designed to handle either the additional bodies or designed around the needs of care for aging individuals. As you get older, and this is really geared towards hospitals and long-term care facilities predominantly, there's things that happen to you biologically, especially with your eye and the way that light receives into your brain that really regulates your entire body. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the healthcare facilities of the olden days are designed to meet those needs. For lighting, you need higher light levels. You may need more blue and enriched light to help stimulate your circadian entrainment. There's so many things that we need to consider now as people are aging and getting older. And I would say the other trend too is the need for this access to convenient care. Once upon a time, and me growing up and many of us growing up, When we had something going on, we had to go to the big beacon hospital in our local city, right? We went to an emergency room, we looked at those as where we needed to go. And now it seems on every street corner, we have urgent cares, we have our medical office buildings that our general practitioners and our dentists and our dermatologists are in. So just this evolution of no longer needing to necessarily go to the hospital and stay overnight, you can get good quality and convenient care in so many more local spaces now.
Yeah, so you kind of touched on this. You're just talking about that, but I'm kind of curious. Let's focus a little bit on the building types that we're expected
Mm-hmm.
to see growth in over the next few years. And you kind of explained the changing demographics and things, but
Yeah.
maybe any other reasons why we're seeing this shift in the types of buildings that are being built out for healthcare.
Yeah, there has been and will continue to be a rise in what are called ambulatory care facilities. That's a synonymous term with the facilities also called outpatient care. And for folks who might be intimidated by that word, ambulatory care, what is this? Just think about types of healthcare facilities that you don't need to stay overnight. It's your urgent cares, it's your medical office buildings, your clinics, even your imaging centers and your dialysis clinics that are just these independent freestanding buildings that you can go get this quick care. One of the main drivers of the evolution and the rise of these ambulatory care type facilities was initially driven by the Affordable Care Act. What was interesting is back when the Affordable Care Act in the early 2010s came around, over 20 million Americans got access to insurance overnight, but that didn't necessarily mean they had access to quick, convenient care at their local street corner.
Mhm.
So we had the rise of these ambulatory care facilities that provided that level of care. And it's not going anywhere anytime soon because us as individuals living in a community, we don't want to wait for hours in an emergency room when we need help. We want to go get our flu shots and bring our kids who might have sore throats to these places to get that level of care.
Okay, well, let's look. You mentioned a few different building types. Let's just focus on a couple of them in our time and dig in maybe to their unique needs and challenges and, and fit it, and for lighting specifically, obviously, and what designers, manufacturers are doing to help meet these needs and challenges. So let's start with urgent care centers, which, as you mentioned, it's crazy how much you see them around. It's just like, whoa, what the heck? Um, and obviously they've been popping up in my area just like anywhere else. So what are some of the special needs for lighting for urgent care centers?
For those who tend to get intimidated by luminaire selection in healthcare facilities, for urgent cares, they tend to use pretty common fixtures like we see in even places like commercial office space. We have our reception areas that maybe we'll use more architectural and slightly decorative fixtures. In the nursing area and the waiting areas, it tends to be recessed linear slot. It tends to be troffers and maybe downlights as well. The place that you need to spend a little extra care in is in the exam rooms themselves. A lot of individuals don't know that in those exam rooms, from the IES recommended practices for healthcare facilities, you technically have two different light levels that you need to account for, depending on state of the room and what care is happening. So when a care practitioner, a nurse practitioner, or a doctor walks into that room to examine a patient, you need this higher level of more focused illumination at that chair, at that table. So you have this high level that tends to go up to about 50-foot candle averages. But who wants to go into a room and sit in a chair that is under 50-foot candle averages? Not most. So you also have this general illumination state that tends to be a lower level, around 10 to 20-foot candle averages. But we need to think about that as lighting practitioners. We need to be cognizant of the quality of light that the patient or the resident is under, and at the same time have focused directional, proper illumination for the caregiver to effectively monitor that patient.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, for the urgent cares, the main thing to look for from a luminaire standpoint is the ability to wipe it down. And a lot of us,
Mm.
when we say healthcare, we think about infection control, we think about being able to spray and hose fixtures down in certain areas. Not as necessary in urgent cares, but guess what? There's dust. There's things that accumulate on luminaire faces and lenses. We need to be able to have a smooth, wipeable finish to be able to clean them.
I'm just thinking about this thing here, Tommy, that I think impacts almost all medical facilities, so not necessarily just urgent care, but what's the impact of like electromagnetic emissions and things like that, like with the lighting, ballast? I don't know, you don't really use ballast as much anymore, but medical equipment and all that.
It's a really good question. So, especially maybe in our urgent cares, but especially in imaging centers, we need to be mindful that images are being taken by medical professionals. Let's say I went into an x-ray, I went into a space with maybe a sprained ankle or something we need to get an x-ray taken care of. So we need to be mindful as lighting practitioners that the luminaires themselves, their drivers, the electronics are not going to have any negative impact on conducted or radiated emissions that may pose concerns around the efficiency of the medical equipment taking that image. The one that tends to that has some very special luminaire requirements, construction requirements, electrical requirements, tends to be when you run into MRI spaces, which you think these outpatient facilities, you don't have to go to a hospital to get an MRI any done. There's these freestanding MRI businesses that you can go to, but in order for the image and the machinery to effectively work, you need to make sure the luminaire has what's called a non-ferrous construction or non-ferromagnetic construction. And so typically they tend to be aluminum in construction, but quite literally, you remove the driver from that shielded room. So in MRI spaces, you put the driver outside of the room itself so that you have no option to have electromagnetic interference. It could mess up the image that's being taken.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Um, all right, so let's move to surgery centers
Oh,
and
okay.
some of the specific needs and challenges that they face.
Yes. No, surgery centers, cleanliness is key, and that will be a common theme throughout any of these spaces, right? And you'll have administration areas, you'll have places where charts are being drawn up, notes are being taken. So we need to be very mindful, especially where the caregivers are putting proper task illumination at a desk, at a table where someone may be taking notes or maybe charting. And also, keep in mind, if a nurse or a caregiver is sitting down at a desk, you want to make sure that there's not direct illumination coming into someone's eyes, right? Who wants to experience that? You want
Uh,
the light to be directed towards the task. The space that is very unique in ambulatory surgery centers specifically is the operating rooms. In the operating rooms, we now have access in LED world to have specialty colored LEDs that really provide the surgeon, the caregivers, those executing the procedure with good quality illumination that doesn't have to keep them from accurately seeing an image. It's much more rare nowadays to, for lack of a better term, cut people open. So many procedures are minimally invasive where we use cameras to navigate through one's body, and you use TV monitors to help navigate through that body, through the cavities. And what's been found and absolutely becoming very prevalent in ambulatory surgery centers and operating rooms as a whole is using green LEDs. So during the procedure itself, they'll flip the surgical troffers, they'll flip the surgical downlights into a green LED function because under the green color, a few things. You don't get glare on the monitor, so you can accurately see the picture. Your eye also has the highest level of visual acuity, so you can see sharp, sleek details. And I'll say the most commonly known benefit of green is you get the highest contrast of red objects, bloods, tissues, veins, etc. So green, the color lends itself very well into these ambulatory surgery centers, especially in the operating rooms.
all right, so now let's talk about the kind of the thing I brought up in the introduction, the mental health. So behavioral health centers, which we're seeing, an increase in as well. The pandemic kind of brought these to attention too, and we're just becoming, fortunately, a little bit more vocal and open about mental health and the importance and all that. So again, kind of repeated the questions I've asked in the other ones,
Mhm.
kind of what are some of the challenges faced here, and kind of what are some of the things that they're looking for.
Now, I think there's two fundamental challenges that we're facing as designers, as lighting practitioners, as people erecting these buildings of care. The main one being with the rise in mental health challenges during and following the pandemic, hospitals, independent mental health and behavioral health treatment facilities don't necessarily have the quantity of rooms that they need that have luminaires, furniture, plumbing equipment that's considered ligature resistant. When I use the word ligature resistant, it means there's no graspable edges or lips or reveals on the light fixtures, on the controls, on the furniture itself that would pose a place for someone to potentially harm oneself.
Mm.
And with the lesser quantity of rooms, there's many healthcare facilities that I've seen that have started to take their traditional patient rooms, their traditional resident spaces, and essentially future proof them with ligature resistant furniture, light fixtures, etc. Just so if one day they needed to convert that traditional patient room into a mental health residential room, they have the flexibility to do that. And I think the second trend that we're seeing in the rise of is one size doesn't fit all. Mental health treatment facilities are such a broad umbrella term for individuals who might be suffering from PTSD. It might be drugs and alcohol recovery. It could be traditional mental health challenges and depression. And there's many different needs of the various room types that fall into these mental health treatment spaces. Most folks from the lighting side and the design side, when we say behavioral health, individuals are automatically thinking about the resident rooms because the luminaires should be feature a ligature resistant construction. But how about the more communal areas? How about the activity rooms, the hallways, and the corridors? If they're more monitored, we might not necessarily need a ligature resistant construction, but we should strongly consider any lenses that are exposed to be polycarbonate and impact resistant in construction, and consider tamper resistant fasteners. And the third area too, you think about behind closed doors, behind lock and key, where residents may not even have the opportunity to ever go. They tend to use more generic fixtures that we use, truffers, flat panels, because that's an area that we might have the flexibility to save some cost with that luminaire style as well. In healthcare, you need to be very cognizant of conditions that individuals may have. They might have a certain propensity for epilepsy. They might have degenerative eye challenges as well, that you may lose your peripheral vision. You might have degeneration of the eye where you lose it in the middle. And potentially glary light sources could have very significant impacts on one's health. So that's more for the patient, right? That resident who's visiting the space. You also need to be very cognizant of the fact that the caregiver needs to effectively see the patient. And if your eye is constantly trying to adjust in a room from a glary source to a not so glary space in the room, that's very challenging in order to really hone in on the needs of the patient, which seconds matter in many healthcare environments. We don't need to be waiting for our eyes to adjust to accurately monitor a patient. And color quality of the light source, of the LED source, is huge in healthcare environments because we need to accurately be able to see someone's skin tone. That's where we start to have a lot of conversations with R9 values, with LEDs, the capability, the ability to render red colors so we can accurately depict the quality of one's skin tone, because that's a very quick visual tool that we can use as caregivers can use rather, to see if their patient is in a good state or may need immediate assistance.
What is a trend you see coming in the healthcare space as far as potential construction demand?
I think it's here, but I think it's going to rise even more, is the introduction and the investment of retail facilities. Think the CVS's of the world, think of the Walgreens of the world that, hey, right now we have services, we can go get a flu shot from a local pharmacist. But I foresee the expansion of those services to take on more levels of care that we may get at our urgent cares and our medical office buildings. I see that rise in these clinics because guess what? those types of retail facilities are on many street corners. It actually makes a lot of sense for us to go to a local store, a local retail facility like that, and have the flexibility and the ease of access to some levels of care because they're already there. Brick and mortar exists already. So why not invest in those platforms and those spaces to help individuals care in their local neighborhoods? Yeah.
So what can manufacturers, designers, or even the building owners themselves, what should they approach? How should they approach these locations maybe differently than they're thinking
I
about other
think it's
facilities?
I think it's really about having a very good relationship with the specifier or the healthcare influencer, the manufacturer, and of course the retail clinic themselves, and really any type of healthcare facility to have a very interactive conversation about and education about what exists. What flexibilities do you have with lighting? Is it circadian lighting or tunable light solutions? Is it high CRIs to accurately render individual skin tones? Is it non-glary LED sources and light fixtures inherently? So it's to be able to educate those individuals who make the decision about the luminaire selection that go into these retail clinics, these retail spaces, so that we all have accurate and positive lighting in these spaces. Because lighting the rest of the retail clinic is not like lighting a clinic, right? We have general illumination solutions, really high ceilings. We're going to more typically smaller size ceilings, and we need to make sure that we right size the needs of lumens inside those spaces.
Yeah, I just wonder. I mean, I've not spent a lot of time, but I know these kind of centers you're talking about where they're developing, and I feel like what I see is, the retail space was designed blank years ago or whatever as a retail space, and they're like, oh, we want to add this clinic or whatever. I think the lighting looks very similar. I'm like, well, maybe you need to think about lighting that space
Yes,
differently. It's not
correct.
retail, so
And
yeah,
there's also an important piece to the puzzle around controls, right? I tend to
yeah,
live in lighting so much, but we need to be cognizant of having simple and intuitive controls, wall controllers on the wall that a pharmacist, a caregiver at one of these retail clinics can intuitively activate and
uh
also be able to wipe them down. Individuals get hands, we're touching money, we're touching other medicines and drugs. We want to be able to wipe those wall switches down.
yeah. That's funny. I mean, I had a conversation about lighting a few episodes ago, and I mean, controls is huge. I hear about it all the time, and yeah, but in this space, and it's always that person's trained medically and now retail-y, and now we have to ask them to how to, control a light source. It's like, come on. But yeah, intuitive and maybe even voice activated as we move forward. Which actually just occurred to me like, oh yeah, voice activated would be great for a medical space because then there's less concern with cleaning. I mean, you
Could
still
be,
need
or
cleaning.
even think wall controllers as well that you might be able to wave in front of to execute some kind of operation. There's technologies that are evolving around that, but
Yeah.
most fundamentally, the flexibility that there's less or minimal or no nooks and crannies on that wall switch, so you can wipe it down, is key,
Uh,
bare minimum.
yeah, yeah. Um, so how are lighting designers, contractors, and manufacturers starting to look at healthcare lighting to improve the outcomes of the care given?
What's very exciting, I would say this has really started to rise over the past decade and continues to evolve in terms of making decisions about the built environment based on credible research to ideally improve some kind of patient resident outcome and caregiver effectiveness. I would say kind of sponsored or so by the Center for Health Design. They've put together this whole program that's called your evidence based design certification. But the basis of it is that during the design process, you form this core interdisciplinary team. So you get involvement and buy in for certain design strategies that you may implement on these healthcare facilities from start through construction and through measuring the results of them. So involving the lighting designers, executives at healthcare facilities, the designers that are involved, the contractors who are going to install the product, service them, etc. It's getting this core team together to help make decisions around these structures, these healthcare beacons in our communities, to provide some kind of value, ideally, to the patient who's going to execute them. And there's a whole certification around this now. I was lucky enough to just finish mine. And it
For
really opens your eyes to just as designers, as people who can influence the selection of lighting, to be able to make some recommendations. It could be as simple as like having larger windows in the space to have more access to natural light. It could be things like involving handrails to help allow a resident to have something to hold on to reduce your likelihood to fall inside a patient room when you're on your way to the restroom. There's so many different strategies that we can incorporate. And most importantly, this body of credible research that exists that we can look back to before we implement these designs and put them on our projects.
what are some other, I don't know, design strategies that one could implement that may have been learned or influenced maybe from evidence-based design philosophies?
That's a really good question. I would say one of the most prevalent one is about most simply connectivity to nature. The more elegant word for it is biophilic construction, biophilic lighting, right? It's just this concept of being able to connect individuals with essentially the earth, right? With nature. And there's so many different ways that I've seen this implemented in long-term care facilities. It might be as simple as having fabric patterns that help emulates earth tones or leaves. Or I've also seen facilities quite literally bring nature in. For those who may not be able to go outside and connect with it, there's individuals and facilities who have brought aquariums into their facilities. I've
Mhm.
seen some that have quite literally bringing in aviaries, like large bird cages,
Oh,
to
wow.
allow those residents to connect with nature. But for, I would say, like future construction of spaces, I've absolutely seen this rise in having these centralized, almost gardens. They might be called serenity gardens. They
Uh,
might have fountains, it might have koi ponds, but it provides a controllable space, right? A monitorable space for caregivers to allow the residents, the patients to go to that's in a safe environment. And number one, get access to sunlight, which is great, but be able to connect with nature in a safe, clean manner.
yeah, I mean, I think designer or architects, just the one I know the most. I'm sure there's many others that do this, but Frank Lloyd Wright, right, making their buildings kind of merge with nature.
Yes.
It's interesting. That we could do more of that for sure. A lot of our buildings, especially healthcare, can be it's kind of known as cold and impersonal, right,
It can be.
and
There's
intimidating.
well, not getting into the necessarily minutia of it. When we think back to like evidence-based design, credible research, back in the 70s, there was a study done in recovery spaces that in the recovery rooms, they had two spaces, and one had many images of more urban environment on the walls. And then
Uh-huh.
the other one had nature views, it had trees, it had things along those lines, and they were actually able to correlate the less frequency and the reduced quantity of pain relieving medication needed for those individuals who had the nature view spaces.
Huh. It seems to me, Tommy, that evidence-based design would kind of just happen, right? Just through time. Like, hey, we noticed this. But can you kind of like, what's the difference? Like, why is there a designation for it? It just seems like something that would happen. So, sounds like I'm,
There's we kind of take it for granted now. Some of the learnings that have been implemented because of evidence based strategy, like you may think about things about putting hand washing sinks in resident rooms. That wasn't necessarily a necessary thing and an expectation for healthcare facilities until fairly recently, generally speaking, but
uh,
that was based in the goal of reducing infections, right? From
right.
individuals being able to wash their hands. So
Okay.
things as simple as that, right? That now we would say you're not putting sinks in a space to wash your hands all over the place. We take that for granted now. But the whole concept here is that there's been individuals who have implemented these strategies and, most importantly, measured the results. Whether they were favorable or not favorable compared to the hypothesis, they did this footwork. So that
Uh,
now, for these designers, for us as lighting practitioners, we kind of take them for granted, saying, duh, yeah, we're going to do those basic things. But we've had people who have done the footwork.
Yeah, now I'm thinking, do we need to do a whole episode on evidence-based things? Because
There's so many different angles to take that and so much research.
are there some resources, with evidence-based design, but some of the other things you've talked about with me today, some resources that listeners can access that can help them kind of plan to start to think about how to design better lighting and implement better lighting strategies in healthcare?
I would think my central go-to, right? My central repository that I use, and they've been nice enough to put this together, is on the Center for Health Design's website. They have hundreds and hundreds of studies that make it easy to really search based on subject. So let's say a lighting practitioner, a designer is considering working with the individual at the facility to incorporate strategies to reduce hospital acquired infections or reduce the quantity of patient falls. You can put in search terms and quickly look back to the research, figure out when the research was done, where it was executed, to be able to relate it back to your project. So I would say the Center for Health Design is this central repository for knowledge. But you can simply just go on Amazon and eBay and just Google evidence-based design. And there's been so many individuals who have written books and real life practice around implementing these design tactics into their spaces, discussing why they did it, what made them think of even doing it, and what was the outcome of it.
Okay. Any other resources that you can think of outside of that?
I think those are probably the main ones for me. That
Okay.
Center for Health Design, I don't want to minimize it by any means. Significant amount of reading material there for individuals.
Okay. Great. Well, Tommy, I always like to close out the conversation talking about the why of what we do. So, what
Yes.
motivates you to do this day in and day out? What keeps you excited and passionate about what you do?
What I really enjoy about the type of lighting and controls that I get to support is in the healthcare space, you have to have this vast level of knowledge about all of the unique challenges faced, needs of the space, and ratings and listings of luminaires and controls that go into the different types of healthcare spaces. But what really keeps me excited, energized about what I get to do every day is the educational aspect of it, because so many individuals tend to be intimidated by luminaire and control selection and even design of healthcare facilities. And what I love to do is be able to teach people about the unique needs of those spaces, lessons learned, things that folks can look to as well. And also, for myself, selfishly, learn from their experiences as well.
Mhm.
Most fundamentally, I just love to teach people about healthcare spaces, healthcare luminaires and controls. That's what keeps me going every day.
Well, I mean, in some of our conversations, you've brought academics and stuff, so it's obviously a important part of you and who you are. And so everyone knows, Tommy actually hosted one of Gray Bar hosts webinars a couple times a month and on a variety of topics, an hour-long type of things, kind of typical webinar situation. And Tommy was one of our presenters, and I could just sense his excitement and obviously a passion for what he was talking about, not just kind of going through the motions to do a webinar, but you could tell he was excited, which is why I asked him to come on here and kind of just give a different view of things than what the webinar presented. And so it comes through in how you come across, which is why I had you, and it's proven to be true. So I appreciate your energy and excitement and willingness to be here. And so I do want to thank you for taking some time to be on the show. Thanks, Tommy.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you so much.
Okay, that was my conversation with Tommy Nichols, Business Development Director for Healthcare under Acuity Brands Lighting. You can connect with Tommy and what he is working on by heading to the links in the show notes. Hey, I would love to hear how you're approaching healthcare lighting nowadays. You can email me at podcast@graybar.com. If you enjoyed this episode, you can really help us grow it by, leaving a 5-star rating, subscribing, and rating the shows on YouTube and on your favorite podcast player. Thanks for listening to this episode of Keeping the Lights On. We'll see you next time. Do you have a hobby or media? So it could be like a book, magazine, website, YouTube video, movie, TV, art, or like I said, a hobby you do that inspires you to be a better person, improve your work, whatever it is.
I think my most recent hobby that I've picked up, it's actually quite challenging for me, is tennis. So about
Oh,
6 months ago, during the winter season when I was down in Florida, I started taking tennis lessons. And historically, I haven't been all that athletic of a fellow. I've always been a band guy growing up and involved in the arts.
uh,
So involving myself in some kind of sport has been different, and learning it from the ground up, like proper technique, just physical activity, right? And when you're constantly moving around and adjusting, and I relate that so much to my role that I'm in at this time because I'm learning all of these different healthcare spaces, influencers, needs, and it's been quite the learning experience for me.
yeah. So my wife was, I don't know, a few years ago, was looking to just, you get these things that pop up everywhere. Top 5 exercises to make you live forever, or whatever. And tennis was the top one, actually. So,
Mm,
which I thought it might be swimming because it's a little less impactful, but it was tennis because you're using so much of your body and stuff and cardio and all that. So,
so I'll tell you, after it, I'm pretty darn sore. So it's using some muscles that I don't use regularly.
oh, yeah. Well, and yeah, interesting. Um, or I'm glad, and it's good that you didn't just go out that route that most people are going nowadays, pickleball. So you went full on. You're like, I'm going for the real thing here. So
I'm
that's
fully
good.
committed.
Good. I don't do either one. So, um, all right. What advice would you give to 18-year-old Tommy?
To keep going on the path and continue the career exercises that I was doing at the time. When I was that age, I was heavily involved and had a plan to involve myself in academic affairs at universities. That's what I did my undergrad in, my master's degree, and life pivoted pretty quickly when I had the opportunity to join a lighting company. And that was a very unsettling thing for me at the time. I didn't have the academic experience behind it. And I would tell myself at that time, keep doing with what you're doing and make sure the education backs it because you learned so many skills as someone attending a university, critical thinking skills, working with others, living with others. And at the time, I didn't understand the full value of those experiences. But now in my professional career, working with lighting designers, working with agency partners, just working in the design community, you have to interact with so many different personalities. I gained a lot of those core skills back then, and I'm so appreciative I had that.
Okay. Does that
Yeah.
mean like you want to take classes that kind of pertain to what you're doing, or?
I do. I've challenged myself, I would say for the past 5 years, once per year, do some kind of academic activity. Most recently was my evidence based design certification called the EDAC certification. But the year before that, and actually 2 years before that, I finished up my MBA as well to be a little more financial savvy. And prior to that, I was able to do my NCQLP LC certification. So once a year, essentially in my spare time, I study for these tests because I just want to continue to develop as a professional. And also, just as I get older, continue learning those different skills and relate it back to my work life.
Wow, that's fantastic. And congratulations on the certification. I think we're going to touch on that later.
Yes.